It's now in Moscow. This week, Turkey plays the EU on the refugee crisis. Israel sees a wave of blood, and exploited so-called Afghan dancing boys are in the now. I know how to solve the refugee crisis. Give me 3 billion euro, no travel restrictions, and EU membership. In return, I'll take all your migrants, and you take our migrants. Okay? Deal? Who am I? That's right, Turkey. Turkey basically dictated to the Europeans the rules of the game. I'm sure Europeans are playing happy here and agreed on this so-called draft accord. But did they actually have a choice? Joining me in the now is Faisal Al-Yafai, chief columnist at The National. Thanks for being with us. Does Turkey have an upper hand here during these negotiations with the EU?
I'm not sure anybody has an upper hand. You have millions of people streaming across the Syrian border into Turkey. I'm not sure that the right way to frame it is that they have an upper hand. You're certainly right, though. I mean, if you look at the deal or the parameters of the deal, if the deal works out the way it's portrayed, then yes, it does look like Turkey came out of it rather better. But then remember that the Turks have, for the last 4 years, been bearing the brunt of the refugee crisis along with other Arab countries.
So Europe doesn't really have many options here, basically, is what you're saying.
The whole world has very few options. The whole world is seeking to find a resolution to this Syrian crisis, to the refugee crisis. You're absolutely right, of course, that the Europeans cannot shut themselves off from the rest of the world. So yes, they are struggling to find a resolution. They have found one that they think will move forward the process, that will stop the boats coming across the Mediterranean, and they've grasped at it.
Should the EU and Turkey be doing more, or trying to do more to resolve the actual Syrian crisis on the ground in Syria, of course, the cause of many of these refugees?
Of course. Every country, I mean, I've been saying this for at least 4 years now, that the Syrian civil war cannot be contained within the borders of Syria. It is going to become, and it has become, a problem for the Middle East, for the European continent. So now, after so many years, 2 years into this severe refugee crisis, the Europeans are finally finding a way to stem the people coming across. But it will not resolve the underlying issue. The underlying issue is the Syrian civil war. The Syrian civil war needs to be brought to a conclusion. If it is brought to a conclusion, then the refugee crisis will end, but not the other way around.
I think few people would argue that the Syrian war needs to be brought to an end. What do you make of the current peace process attempt?
Yeah, I think that's the right way to phrase it, the peace process attempt. The peace seems to be holding. I can't say that I was the greatest fan of how it was brought about, but anyway, we are where we are with the peace process. If it holds, it's held for a couple of weeks, some violations. If it holds and they restart talks as they have suggested they will on Monday, then maybe they can start moving forward to some kind of settlement. Anything that will stem the flow of the refugees, anything that will end the killing, the starvation, the barrel bombing, everything else.
Let's talk a little bit more about some of the background, how we got here. Will some of the opposition in Syria be ready to work with Assad, or is Assad leaving this solution, this formula, I should say, going to be demanded by some of those parties, including some of the Western partners?
Yes. So the idea that Assad should go has been the war cry, the rallying cry for the best part of the last 5 years. It was the thing that was demanded at the very beginning of the Syrian civil war, after it moved from being a revolution, an uprising, into a civil war. I'm not sure is the honest answer. It is no secret that I think that Assad's time is over, that the legitimacy of a person who barrel bombs and starves his own people means that he can no longer remain in control of that country. But it does look like other countries, the Western countries in particular, the United States, have come to the Russian position that maybe there is a role for him for a while. how you parse that particular phrase "for a while" is the essential problem. It is the essential component that we don't yet have an answer to.
Let's talk about Turkey and Saudi Arabia. They seem to be forging somewhat of an alliance. Turkey recently joining Saudi-led war drills in the region. How could this partnership play out?
Well, I think it might be somewhat early to talk about a partnership. What is happening is that the Middle Eastern countries are looking at what is happening in Europe, in North America, this discussion between the European Union and the Americans and the Russians, and they are fearful that the Europeans do not fully grasp that if you continue the process as it is in Syria, if you continue the military involvement of the Russians and you shore up the Assad regime, that is a recipe for continued war. The Middle Eastern countries have been trying to explain this for years, that there is no solution that entails a Assad regime without legitimacy. And so what's happening now with the Saudis and the Turks is that they are seeking to find a way to send that message, to telegraph that message, that if the Western countries are not willing to find a genuine peaceful solution, they are willing to perhaps put boots on the ground, use military involvement, forge some sort of alliance, as you alluded to.
Why would Western powers not be wanting to or willing to look for some kind of peaceful solution?
Well, I think it's the point that you made earlier, that they have had so many years of this refugee crisis that they haven't quite grasped the severity of the Syrian civil war. They didn't expect it to bleed across the borders, to come across the Mediterranean Sea, across the Balkans route. And now that that has happened, they are seeking any way to end it. And if that way is the Russian way which seems to be, let's shore up Assad, keep him in control of some parts of the country at least, if that is the only solution on the table, the European countries appear willing to take it. The Arab countries, the Middle Eastern countries are not willing because they don't believe that that is a long-term solution to the crisis.
So what would be their solution to the crisis?
Well, now, an even better question, because there isn't a clear opposite answer. And that's one of the reasons why this Russian deal, let's call it, has got so much traction, because there isn't another solution. Like we said earlier, the Free Syrian Army, the opposition on the ground, the other Arab countries have been saying for years that Assad must go, but there hasn't been a way to push him out. Now the Saudis are saying, if he doesn't go through negotiations, they are willing to use force. They haven't clarified what that means yet, but they are forging this alliance with the Turks, sending fighter jets to Incirlik, with the idea that if it need be, they have the weaponry in place.
I want to just focus finally on the United States. I mean, they're so involved here in a way, and yet so far away. A lot of the brunt physically being put on the Europeans. Do you think there's this idea in Europe that maybe it's time for the U.S. to sort of get more involved in the actual backfiring that Europe is seeing from this crisis, meaning, of course, the refugee problem? Should we see more hands-on from the United States when they have so much hands-on in terms of the war and crisis in Syria, in Libya, in the Middle East in general?
Yeah. Well, the European countries, of course, have been saying for a very long time that they want the Americans to lead from the front, not lead from the back. I think that they recognize that the Americans are very much distracted now because of their political process, which is going to play itself out for the rest of this year. So there's not going to be really a great deal of leadership coming from the White House for the foreseeable future. Personally, of course, I think that. I think everybody needs to be doing more to support the refugee crisis. The Americans have only taken a handful of Syrians. There's no appetite among the population for them to take more. This is disgraceful. This is a disgraceful moment in American history when you have this exodus of people unfolding in Europe and they are not willing to lend a hand.
Right, Faisal Al-Yafai, chief columnist at the National newspaper, with us in the Now. Thanks so much. Terrorism is blamed on Muslims a lot, despite the fact that it's Muslims who suffer from it more than anyone else. A group of Saudi pranksters wanted to make that point exactly, but might have crossed the line instead.
هذا حزام أنا آسف.
طب نسبه.
سوف نفجر الكمباوند وسوف تكون معي إن شاء الله بإذن الله. سوف تكون معي شهيد إن شاء الله.
الله خليك وقفني الله خليك.
سوف تكون معي شهيد إن شاء الله.
الله خليك وقفني الله خليك.
سوف تكون معي شهيدا بإذن الله.
الله خليك وقفني.
سوف تكون من الشهداء. ألا تريد أن تدخل الجنة؟
روح ذلك الجنة وقفني. الله خليك وقف هنا.
وقف بإذن الله. وقف بإذن الله. لا وقف. أننا في الفردوس الأعلى من الجنة. باذن الله اننا في الفردوس الاعلى من الجنه. اقفل الباب، اقفل الباب، اقفل الباب، تعال هنا. اوقف حتكلم معك دقيقه واحده يا ابو.
طيب سيبك.
حسيبك بس افهم. طول هنا طول هنا طول هنا طول هنا. طول ورا طول ورا. هذه كاميرا خفية. هذا تمثيل كان معاك، ركبنا وضحكنا عليه ولعبنا معاك ومزحنا معاك عشان نوريك انه كيف الانسان هذا هو الارهابي وخوف المسلمين. لا تبكي يا بني، لا تبكي، لا تبكي حبيبي، لا تبكي. هذول معاونين للكفار. انا لابس حزام ناس.
ما انت لابس فين؟
شوف انا لابس حزام.
والله باسل لابس حزام يا باسل.
لا لا تخاف لا تخاف. لا تمسكني لا تمسكني.
لازم ما
لا تمسكني لا تمسكني لا تمسكني.
امسك ما يقرب لهذا، ما يقرب مره.
سوف اقتل نفسي.
خلي امسك مضبوط.
الجنة يا شباب، الجنة.
لحد تصل على الشرطه.
الكاميرا الخفية
مضبوط.
الكاميرا الخفية. دقني كيف صارت؟ خربتوا لي الدقن. لا يا شيخ خربتوا لي الدقن. يعني هذا مزح كذا؟
Well, from fake terror to real terror, Israel is hit with another stabbing attack this week. We speak to a representative from one of the ruling Palestinian parties, Fatah, coming up in the Now. Stay with us.
I'm Tom Hartman, and I'll give you what the mainstream media can't, the big picture.
There's been no charges filed against him.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
Political revolution.
And when you question more, you find what you're looking for.
This is the legislative branch of the parliament.
We'll go deeper, investigate, and debate, all so you can get the big picture.
About your sudden passing, I've only just learned. You wore yourself thin, taking your last wrong turn. Your act got up to you as we all knew it would. I'd tell you I'm sorry, if only I could. So I write these last words in hopes to put to rest these things that I never got off my chest. I remember when we first met, my life turned on each breath. But then my feelings started to change. You talked about war like it was a game. Still, some were fond of you, those that didn't like to question or argue. And I secretly promised to never be like you. It's said one does not leave a funeral the same as one enters. The mind gets consumed with death, but this one quite differs. I speak to you now because there were no other takers. To proclaim that mainstream media has met its maker.
Here's what people have been saying about Redacted tonight.
Give it to us.
Redacted is full-on awesome. The only show I go out of my way to watch every week. It really packs a punch. Lee Camp is the John Oliver of RT America.
You have the same accent.
Hey, we are apparently better than boobs.
Nothing's better than boobs.
You see, people you've never heard of love Redacted tonight. The president of the World Bank, though, hates it.
He doesn't really have any taste.
Seriously, if you send us an email.
Tioga, a little town of maybe 600 people, has to be supporting 8,000 people now.
Even in Florida, in the papers and on the news, it's come to North Dakota.
This is the place to be.
I'm not living off of hope, but I am hopeful. I'm living off what is going to happen.
It's like we've been invaded by some big foreign blob that is out to get rid of my place, get rid of my very being.
A tradition in Afghanistan known as Bacha Bazi, or dancing boys, is in the now today. Young men dressed as girls and made to dance and then sleep with adult men.
سنة 12 بودم علاوه بر خب دو معلومات از این چیزا نداشتم شاید فکر کنم که یک سال به خاطر بازی هستن به خاطر
شاید معبد زیادتر باشن و در دادن از این بسیار مشکل هستن.
بچه که امی سنده یگان 12-13 ساله بچه باشه این زیاد چالش زیاد است. از او خردش طفل است. اون از اون 13 سالگی با زیر نگاه میکنه دیگه تا سنده 25 ساله. اینطور است که این چون کشور اسلامی است به خاطر از اینکه این بسیار بد گپ است باز که از دخترای خدا نمیماند در بیرون بسیار بد میبرن از او خاطر بچه کمی نسبت به دختر آزادتر است دیگه بین مردم.
از پلیس چطور است
دولت که دیگه پیشتر که برات گفتم که دختر نیست که دولت برات گیر بیته چطور است میشه دست راهش را بند کنی.
A Palestinian man stabbed at least 11 people this week, killing an American near a tourist area in Jaffa, Israel. The attacker was shot dead by police. He was later identified as a 20-year-old man from a West Bank refugee camp. Well, Palestinian authorities are being slammed for not condemning the attack, and some go as far as to say praise the attacker as a hero. Dimitri Didiani, member of Fatah Revolutionary Council, is in the now with us from Jerusalem. Thanks so much for being with us. Why doesn't Fatah condemn such a brutal act of violence, which by all definitions is terror? Do you condemn this violence?
Well, when Israel started condemning Jewish terrorist groups' actions against Palestinian civilians, when the world started condemning the systematic extrajudicial murders amounting to 200 since October, 200 Palestinians on the hands of Israeli soldiers, settlers, then this would be an appropriate question to ask. You cannot ask the victim to come up all the time and make the extra step towards coming closer to the criminal side that has been killing him. In other words, since October, 200 Palestinian civilians were murdered by Israelis. 1,600 Palestinians were injured since that time. 1,400 women were imprisoned during that time. There are still restrictions on the Palestinian people's movement. There's restrictions on trade. We live under siege all the time. And then you come up with a question like that. I think we offered condolences to Vice President Biden that an American was injured there, but nobody also mentioned that a Palestinian from East Jerusalem, Muhammad al-Wari, was actually injured in the same attack. Nobody said anything about the two bystanders that were shot last week in Jerusalem. You say yourself that a Palestinian was injured. Why not condemn the violence? I mean, surely, and I have no doubt that there is Israeli violence and, repression of the Palestinian people. We condemn...
Go ahead.
No, we condemn all sorts of violence, and we are the ones who are pursuing peaceful solution. But you have to remember that these acts are not calculated, politically driven acts. These are individual acts, and we condemn any kind of violence that would hurt any civilian anywhere. But Israel has to say the same thing, and it has to rise up to the moral level of the Palestinian people who are under international law, have all the right to resist the occupation in any way, shape, form that we see fit without apologizing or condemning anything. But we still condemn violence because we have chose peace as a way to end the violence and end the conflict. And at the same time, the world is witness that Benjamin Netanyahu and his radical right-wing government simply say no to peace, simply say no to two-state solution, simply say no to Palestinian national rights. They dehumanize everything that is Palestinian. And the world would come on us, asking us to take the extra step. Well, we have condemned violence that would hurt anybody, and Israel has to do the same. And the world has to put Israel to the same moral standard as they put the Palestinian people and their leadership.
Speaking of Benjamin Netanyahu, his representative, his Arabic representative, tweeted about this issue that President Abbas refuses to condemn these terrorist attacks, and his Fatah party praised the murder indeed. Can you rebut this fact that many media outlets, given a lot of them Israeli, are reporting that Fatah was praising this act of violence? Is that true?
Fatah's position on the current revolt against occupation is to support it. We are part of the Palestinian people. We would rather have it 100% nonviolent. We have mentioned that and actually issued statements, a statement out of the Revolutionary Council member, an official statement during the session 10 days ago. And the world didn't even pay attention to that. They would pay attention to an article written by somebody from Fatah that praises this, or an interview given to somebody from Fatah that praised this action. But the official Fatah position is to go nonviolent. This has been our strategy. We support the revolt, but we with emphasis that it has to remain nonviolent in order for us, for two reasons actually. One is a moral issue, nonviolence.
But both of us know, Mr. Giuliani, that a nonviolent revolt between the Israelis and Palestinians is impossible. You're calling for something that just can't happen. How can you call for a revolt but then say we push for nonviolence?
It is happening. I mean, you are mentioning individual incidents carried out by, let's say, 200-300 people all throughout since October or September. At the same time, you are taking out of account the hundreds of thousands of Palestinian people that marched through the street and calling through nonviolent resistance, calling to end an occupation. The world doesn't like that. It's not a show. There is no blood. They don't pay attention to that. They don't pay attention to how much effort is put to organizing this large amount of people and how to educate people and mobilize them to go through nonviolence. This is a lot of work. But if you people that are not from Fatah or from any faction decide to go and do something as such, a violent way, we do expect that, because I tell you something, there has been 484 terrorist attack carried out by Jewish groups against Palestinian civilians. Who condemned that? Nobody. Who took them to court? Nobody. Who chased them? Nobody. Who put them under the spotlight and questioned them? Nobody. Netanyahu knows about this. Actually, the government, the right-wing government of Israel, provides political cover to these groups through the statements that it comes out of the mouths of its members, the government's members, forming a political cover for these actions, these terrorist groups, to provide them with financial support through supporting their projects in the settlements, their religious schools in the settlements, through programs, ideological programs in the settlements. Three, provides them with security cover by not chasing them and go after them when they commit those crimes. Out of the 484 crimes, only 2 or 3 were followed up in Israeli courts. And on top of that, it provides them with legal cover through refusing to legislate any laws to stop the Israeli, the Jewish groups' terror. In other words, these are terror groups, Jewish terror groups, sponsored mainly by the government, fueled by the government, protected by the government, and a lot of times escorted by police and army when they commit their crimes. And nobody is putting the state of Israel under question over this. And we are asked somehow to specifically condemn one action. No, we condemn all violence, including the one that is committed by the Israeli army and by Jewish terror groups.
Dmitry Devyani, member of Fatah Revolutionary Council, with us in the now from Jerusalem. Thanks so much for your time. A man who repairs tires in Iraq is trying to reinvent the wheel, so to say. Instead of burning the rubber like most do, he's trying to make a difference. And one of our Facebook followers shared his story of changing tires all the way from Australia. He told us 4 years ago his team was inspired by people like our Iraq story and made a more high-end version of tire furniture. Some pretty cool stuff. It's been a success so far, and they're just beginning to expand internationally. Have a story you want to tell? Send it to us. Stay in touch on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We're also on Vine, Snapchat, and Instagram, so you can be in the now, on the go. I'll see you next week. Remember, it's now or never.